We were really sober on our last video, like really super. So we're going to try to lighten things up a little bit. But at the same time, I think probably the reason that we get sober is because we're getting vulnerable. And that's really what we want to talk about today.
These topics aren't exactly light and fluffy either.
No, but I think the biggest thing is vulnerable, getting vulnerable. And when we get vulnerable, it's like, okay, this is scary. So let's talk about vulnerability today, this here day.
Whatever it is for you.
Right. How do you get vulnerable? Well, can we just say what the difference, what we were told the difference between vulnerability and transparency is? Do you know?
So transparency is kind of being in a fishbowl where people can see, but they can't really touch.
Yeah, and I don't think I quite understand it all the way, but it sort of does make sense. But versus vulnerability is allowing people to like really connect with your heart and in a
enter in. So transparency is people being able to see your heart without touching it. Vulnerability is people being able to see your heart
and allowing you
with an interactive setting, like putting your hand in the fishbowl, touching the fish.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so getting vulnerable is like allowing someone to influence you and being like, okay, I'm letting you in to be like, okay, you help me out and you influence me.
Or you respond and I receive what you're responding to. It could be negative, it could be positive.
Yeah. So, okay, how do you get vulnerability? Because really, last time we spoke about rebuilding trust, and one of the critical components that we were learning together is that we couldn't have trust without being vulnerable, without being transparent and vulnerable, both. So that was like really, okay, how do we get vulnerable, and how do we start working on getting vulnerable with each other? And number one, that we were coached and helped to understand is that you don't have to be vulnerable with everybody in the whole wide world. Okay, so the key part is to find someone that is safe enough that you can be vulnerable with. So that would be the second thing. And really with us, my spouse, she can be a safe enough place to be in. How does she become a safe enough place?
And that was something that I was coached in, because especially when you're the spouse and you've been hurt or betrayed, it's not easy to then become a safe space, because your heart has all its own pain and presuppositions and even reactions. So I was coached, though, that if Tate did come to me and share things, that I needed to receive those things in a non-judgmental spirit. And was that the first time we had the phrase told us, thank you for sharing?
Mm-hmm.
I think, no matter what it is, you can always thank them for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank them for being open and honest. And along with that, for me, I needed to start learning how to be vulnerable back to him, because in my experience, I had always had to push down my own feelings or responses to the other person and what they were sharing, and kind of basically just clone or mimic or whatever. That was kind of how I guess I was trained in my responses to people and their sharing. So I had to learn how to hear, receive, without judgment, his vulnerability, and yet in a safe way share my own responses. Like, that made me feel this way, but that's just what I'm feeling, instead of reacting as in, that means you're this way, or making a more judgment statement on him. It was learning how to be vulnerable in a non-confrontational manner, I guess I would
That's
say.
a good way, a confrontational way.
Yeah.
Because so often I think, well, for me, my thought was, I'd hear like people, well, don't judge me. I was like, well, I mean, wrong is wrong and right is right, or what? But I think confrontational way. So just allowing them to, allowing me to share, allowing you to share without confronting that, and just allowing that to be shared
And received by
in
the
a
other person.
in a, I would say maybe a neutral, in a
Definitely.
neutral
Right, because our
atmosphere.
tendency before was to react to each other's sharing. Like we would take up the parts that would make us like feel personally offended or vulnerable or afraid, and then take that up as a defense
Because what
to what the other person was sharing, instead of just hearing what the other person was sharing. It was hearing through your own your own motives or mindset or pain or whatever.
And I want to add too that what what that does when it is when you share something, you're like, okay, I'm gonna share something, I'm gonna open up a little bit, and it's like, well, that's just that's just wrong, or well, how many times that I never, and you get into those kind of things, then what are you going to do? You're like, well, I'm never going to share again. Absolutely. So, and it just shuts the relationship down instead of just allowing it to be like, okay, thank you for sharing. I'm processing that right now. This feels really painful, but I'm processing it, and I need some space to be able to process that. Okay, now we can.
Or this is the way I heard this. Did I hear this right?
And if you want to continue on the conversation,
if you want to talk about it and not have space, which is what I do.
Yeah. So even to be able to get to that point of starting to share something, I think it really helped me to understand why I didn't want to share. And
that's good.
It's just one word. It's fear.
Yeah.
Complete and absolute terror of being known for who I've made myself out to be and who I believe myself is, instead of who God sees me and believes who I am. So it really does come. It's tied into fear and identity, which we'll get into. We'll get into that maybe a bit more later.